Going live. We're live. I think we're live. Yay.
Yes.
Yay. Hello, everybody. Okay, making sure everything's all good to go. Let us know if you can see me, hear me. All right. I'm Marian with Etchr. Right here in the chat, just so that we can make sure that's working. Type in llama, type in hello, type in where you're from in the chat. Just want to make sure everything is all good to go before we get started here. See how we're doing. Okay. Hi. Okay, there it is. There's a chat. There's a bit of a lag apparently.
Oh yes, it's working. I see it.
You see it? Okay, great. All right. Good to know. Hello, Esther from Seattle. Great. Nice to see you. Again, my name is Marian. I am your host for today with Etchr. We have the wonderful Alexis here with us today, aka tofutt, and she will be doing a quick demo for us today, doing wet and wet watercolor with anime portraits. It's very exciting. All of you anime fans out here have probably been waiting for this. This is great. If this is your first time here with Etchr, you're free to ask questions for Alexis while she's doing her demonstration. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. You can caps lock the word question so that I can see it a little bit easier, and I'll collect your questions so that I can ask them to Alexis throughout her demo today. We do these free online demos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications to stay up to date and be alerted when we go live next. Our next live demo is on Thursday, May 20th with Katie Buttes, I believe is how you say her name. And then the topic will be mixing and blending pigments in watercolor. Okay. All right. So as usual, we have a survey that we like to have people fill out if you can. So I'll post that here. Oh, I just looked at the chat and there's like a flood of like hellos. Thanks everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just looked and I just saw all the floods. So there's the link to our live demo survey. So if you got a couple minutes to fill that out, it's just feedback from me and Alexis. Any thoughts, any kudos, any compliments are very appreciated. So please go ahead and fill that out, and Alexis and I will be happy to take a look at that afterwards. And then I believe that's it. We'll talk about some other things here real quick, but I think I've talked enough. So let's go ahead and have Alexis take it from here. So why don't you let us know what we're doing here today, Alexis?
Yeah, first of all, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to doing this with Etchr for a while. Today we're going to be painting this picture of Todoroki. I have it nice and small so that we can finish it in time and get all the colors in there. And I have my palettes here so that I can also show you guys how I mix the colors. I know I get a lot of questions on how I mix skin colors as well as how I do the hair. So you guys will be able to see that today. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, just put them in the chat and Marian will be able to read them off for me so that I can hear them.
Yeah, and just a real quick, since I forgot to mention this, we do have a reference photo for Todoroki in the video description. And I also have a link for it too. So if you want to paint along or, have that as a guide for you, please go ahead and take a look at that.
Yeah, well, if everything sounds good, and then I guess we'll get started.
Yep.
So when I'm painting, I usually like to start with the lightest colors first and then go into the darks. So in this case for Todoroki, we'll start with his skin. So when I mix skin colors, I like to start with a kind of orangish red color. And I'll get it nice and wet. And then I'll put it in my pan here. Make sure you get a lot of it. You never want to run out of one color when you're painting. Okay, that's good. Then I wash off my brush. Then for skin colors, also I add a little bit of yellow to give it a bit more dimension. So I'll get some yellow here and mix that in with the orange. And then I also like to add a little bit of pink too. So I'll put that pink right on in there. And then at this point, I like to see what kind of color we have. So I'll get a tiny little bit and I'll put it here and I'll just test it on my swatch. And so I can see there, it's a little bit too bright and I want to make it a little darker. So I will get a tiny little bit of navy blue and just put that on in there to make it a little bit darker. And now we'll test it again. Add a little bit more water so it's not so dark. And there we go. It's not as bright. It'll be a good base for his skin tone. Before I paint the skin, I also like to have a little bit of red ready on the side, because one of my signatures in my paintings is to always have a little bit of red bleeding under the eyes. I get a lot of questions as to why I do it, and I don't really have an answer otherwise as to, I just think it looks good and it makes the painting more my own and less just directly from the anime, I think. I'll have a little bit of the light red, and then I'll go in with a little bit of this darker red too, so that I can have it ready on the side there. Okay, so usually when I paint as well, I like to go more from left to right so that my hand doesn't hit the wet parts and I ruin the painting, because that has unfortunately happened far too many times. So for the hand, I'm going to get a little bit of a bigger brush since it's bigger, and I'm going to wet it. I'm going to get like a decent amount of water on the brush and just start putting the plain water over his hand here. And I'm not going to go outside the lines, just kind of keep it in his hand. If it's messy, that doesn't matter. Get a little bit more water, put that on there as well. I'll hold it up so you guys can kind of see how much water I have on there. You can see that it's wet, but it's not about to drip off the page. So now that that's on there, again, I'll wet my brush a little bit and just get a small amount of this skin color because it's a little dark and we don't want it that opaque when we paint it. And then I'll just put that on there. And one of the keys with wet on wet is you have to be fast. You don't want to let areas dry too much, otherwise they're going to turn out really splotchy. Now I like the splotchiness when I do the areas like the shirt and the hair, but for the areas that have skin tones on them, I want them to be pretty smooth. And if you go outside the lines a little bit, you can just wipe it off like that and go right over it.
We had a question on your line art here. What did you use to do your line art prior to the painting?
My line art, I used a Sakura Pigma micron pen. They are my holy grail pen. I swear by them. They don't bleed when you put water on them, and they have a lot of different tip sizes too, so you can get a lot of different dimension in your drawings. I usually like to use the 0.5 and the 0.8. Those are my favorite sizes to use.
Okay,
now that we have a little bit of the hand here, it looks a little splotchy, but that's because it hasn't dried yet. I'm going to go in with a little bit of a smaller brush, wet it, and get a tiny bit of red. And I like the fingertips to be red as well as the knuckles. So I'll dab in the red over here on his fingers, as well as his knuckles. And you can see that because the area is wet, that it's bleeding into it. And that's the effect we're looking for here with the wet on wet. And if there's a certain area that I don't think is bleeding enough, I'll just go in with a little bit of water on my brush, just a little bit, you don't need a lot, and just kind of blend it out there.
Going back to the color mixing, when you were doing this base for the color, the midtones, somebody asked what pink is good to add. I guess you added pink earlier when you were mixing.
Yeah, any pink is good. This one I'm using is by Daniel Smith, but if you're looking for a cheaper option, the Winsor & Newton one is also really good. You can just get a little tube for $5 or $10 because a lot of palettes unfortunately don't come with a pink. So I think that's a good alternative.
Okay.
And if you don't have pink, you can always go in with a little bit of red and purple. That's also a good backup you can use. Okay, now while that's drying, we have the skin on his face to paint as well. So again, we're going to use the same technique and wet the area first. Remember, you want it to be wet, but not too wet that it bleeds outside the lines. This is the key to getting it smooth. And also depending on how big the piece of paper you're painting on is, that'll decide what kind of brush you use. So right now I'm using a bit of a smaller one to go in and add the water, but I'm going to switch to a little bit of a bigger one when I put in the skin tone. That way we can avoid it looking too streaky. So here you can see the difference. This is my smaller brush and this is my larger brush. These are also the Princeton round brushes, the synthetic brushes. They're my favorite to use and honestly pretty good priced as well.
Great. Yeah, you answered that question because somebody asked about your brushes here.
Oh,
Do you
perfect.
stick to the synthetic rounds then? Just different sizes of synthetic rounds?
Yeah. My favorite for big areas is 4. And for the smaller areas, I like 2 and 0. They have a little bit of a different tip at the top.
Okay.
And I'm going to do the same thing here with the skin. Go in, wet my brush, get a little bit of color on it. And again, I want to be quick because I don't want it to dry and I don't want it to be too splotchy. Again, I went outside the lines, but you can just wipe that off super quickly.
Could you talk about the paper that you're painting on? What kind of paper you're on?
Yeah, my favorite paper that I like to use is by the brand Fluid, and it's their hot press paper. You can get it in a watercolor block or in a pad. I usually just take out the pages and cut them with an X-Acto knife to the size that I need them to be.
Okay.
And I've used a lot of papers in the past, and I think this one is the best because you can see when I hold it up here, it's really smooth. There's no grain to it like a lot of watercolor paper has. And that's how I get the really smooth effect at the end.
I see.
So now that I have his skin here, again, I like that little bit of red under the eye. So I'm going to go in and just kind of dab it under his eye here so that it kind of bleeds in. And I'm not going to do this eye because Todoroki has his scar here. So that one will be entirely red. And then I just have 2 little areas here that need a little bit of skin color. So since they're super small, I don't have to add any water beforehand. I can just go right in and paint it with the water that I have on my brush already.
We got a question asking, when you're starting out with watercolor, would you suggest working on smaller papers or larger sizes?
That is a really good question. And from experience, I can say definitely start out small, especially when you're doing this wet on wet technique. The bigger the area, the longer it's going to take to dry and the more paint you're going to have to use. So definitely start smaller. As you can see here, my hand is about just a little bit smaller than the size of the piece that I'm painting. And that makes it a lot easier for it to dry and you use less paint and there's less area to cover in general.
Good tip. Good point.
Okay, so now while we let that dry, we can mix the color that we're going to use for the shadows on his skin. So I'm going to get just a medium-sized brush, any brush works, and I'm going to get some more of this reddish orange over here. I'm going to get a lot and just put that in my pan. That should probably be enough. You don't need too much because there's only a bit of shadows on his hand and a little bit under his neck and face. And then for shadows, I like to use the orange base and then I either go in with a purple or a navy blue. Today, I'm going to go in with a bit of purple. So you can see my palette here. I have purple, just taking a little bit there. This one's pretty strong. And I'll just mix that right in with this. Now we can test it again on here to see how dark it is. And that's a little too warm for my liking. So I'm also going to add a little bit of navy blue. Go in and take some there, put it in here, maybe a little bit more. That one didn't really get as much as I wanted. Test it again. And there we go. A little bit more cool toned. It's almost like a warm purple. Okay, so now that I have that, for the shadows, you want to use a bit more of a precise brush because we're going to be filling in these lines here. So I'm going to use my Princeton round brush in 0 and in 2. I'm just going to get it a little bit wet, kind of dab it on my paper towel and just get a little bit of pigment here because we don't want it to be too dark. And then we just go in and paint these areas that I have blocked off for the shadows.
Is it still kind of damp, this part here from the
yes, this one, if I show it up close, you can see that it looks dry, but when you touch it, it is slightly damp still. And then you can see where I just painted is wet.
And this doesn't mess with this, like it doesn't create splotches or blooms when you go back in with this shadow color?
No, if it's dry enough to where you can look at it and you can't see the water, then you're good to go and it won't bleed.
Very nice.
Yeah, that was a trick I had to learn the hard way. I went in too many times with being too impatient and ruined a lot of paintings that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so going back to a question here.
Yeah,
Is it too bad if we paint a little bit outside the lines, or can it be fixed with the next color?
that is the unfortunate thing with watercolor, that if you do go outside the lines, you can't erase it. But a trick that I do like to use is that if I really mess up, I will go in after I'm done the painting and maybe add a background, or I like to add some gold stars some places. But there's also certain areas like here, you can see I did go outside the lines, but I think it's pretty minor that I wouldn't need to do a background on this piece. I think it kind of gives it a little bit of character, and people know how hard it is to work with watercolors, so I don't think they're going to judge you too hard.
Yeah.
But if it makes you feel better, it still happens to people like me who paint every day.
Right, right. Yeah, so don't feel too bad if you go outside the lines. It just adds a
Yeah,
little character.
perfectly normal, still happens.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. We got a question here about mixing skin tones. So, do you
Yeah.
have a excuse me, do you have a go-to for colors that are best for mixing basic skin tones?
Yes, my go-to is I always start with the orange or red base. And then if I want it to be a lighter skin tone, I leave it with that. Or if I want it to be a darker skin tone, I'll add some brown to it. Any brown works. You can use a warm tone brown or a cool tone brown. And then once I have that base, then I'll go in and add maybe some more yellows if the person's a bit more tan, or a little bit of pink if the person's a bit more pale. And then if I want it to be less vibrant, navy blue or purple. You only need a little bit, and that works honestly every time for me. That's my go-to skin combination.
Nice. But you always start with an orange reddish base and then kind of add
Yeah,
to
no
that.
matter the color of skin, I always start with that as a base, especially because that's a color that you can find in most palettes. So it's okay if you use a lot of it. You can probably see here my orange is quite used up compared to the rest. All right, now we've finished the shadow on his hand. And when you're painting these shadows, don't be afraid to go too dark. I feel like one of the things with watercolors that makes it so nice is the contrast you can have. You can have really light areas, and then the dark ones bring it to life. That's one mistake I feel like a lot of people make, is they do everything too light, and then the whole painting just looks super washed out at the end.
Yeah. It's
I'm also just going in here on his face and adding a little bit more shadows.
If you're just starting out with watercolor, I was just going to say that it's a little tricky to know how light it'll dry, because watercolors kind of dry a little bit lighter. Or is it darker the other way around? They dry lighter, right? Yes, they dry
They
lighter.
do dry lighter, yeah. It definitely takes a bit of practice to know with your palette how light and how dark it dries. But
Yeah.
once you get the hang of it, after you've painted it a couple of times, you'll start to get to know how things dry. Just add some shadows in his ear here too. And then a little bit on the side of his face to make his jawline pop out. And then under the neck. And I usually go pretty heavy on the shadow under the neck to really make it stand out and make him look more 3D. So don't be afraid to really go in with the color here. And when you're painting all these shadows, since you're not going directly on the wet area, you can make sure that you always have just a little bit of water on your brush. Not too much so that it's dripping, but just a tiny, tiny bit so that it doesn't dry too splotchy. See, you can see there, I did the shadow on his neck a lot darker, and it's already giving him a lot more dimension. I'm actually going to go in on his hand here on the area that would be farthest away and add a little bit more darkness there. And you can see already that gives it more dimension.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that when you're doing a wash of the shadow, like try to keep it like smooth, or I guess an even wash as possible so that it doesn't get blotchy. Like if there's not enough pigment in one spot, it'll just dry.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
never want to go in with just completely a dry brush.
Yeah.
The technique I like to use a lot, you can't see it, it's off camera here, but I'll dip my water in the brush just a tiny bit like that. And then I'll just dab it like 1 or 2 or 3, 4 times on the paper towel. That's the good thing I really like about these brushes too, is they hold water in them, so you don't need to have too much. I'm also going to go in with a little bit more red here and make sure that my hand is not touching the area that I just painted. And I'm going to do a couple lines on his knuckles, because if you look on fingers, they have some lines here. So this also just gives it a bit more dimension, make the painting your own, look a little less like it's just straight out of the anime.
Nice.
Also gonna add a little more under his eye.
Right. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No worries.
Yeah. We got a couple here, so I was just waiting for a good time. Since we're still on the topic of skin tones, we got a question here saying, you painted Kakashi as he has a light skin color. What combination did you use for?
Yes, I would use a very similar combination to this, because as you can see, I did make Todoroki pretty pale. So I would go in with a bit of this red here. Then I would add a tiny bit of yellow, a little bit more pink than I did yellow, and then I would add a pretty decent amount of navy blue. And then it'll give you almost a dark color like this. But if you look, when I only use a little bit on here, it comes out super, super light. And that's how I do my lighter skin tones, is I only use a little bit of the pigment that I mixed.
Right, just more water and a little bit less pigment.
Yes.
Cool. Great questions, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking questions. I'm free to answer all of them.
Yeah, I do see a few more questions here. So we'll have Alexis work a little bit more, and then I'll get to your questions. I promise. I'm not ignoring you.
Perfect. Okay, so now since we're still on his face, I'm going to do his scar under his eye. Now you have 2 options in this case. You can, cover the whole area in water and just paint it solid red. But since we are doing this in my style, I like to use my bleeding effect, as I like to call it. So we're going to do that, and I'll show you how I do it on a small area like this. So I have a bit of red mixed here, but I'm going to mix a bit more. So I'm going to take a little bit of this dark red down here and put that in there. And then a bit more of this orangey red. This red is also the same as this one over here, just a different brand. So if you see me go to one or the other, it's the same color. I just instinctively go to one or the other sometimes. And then also, since this is his scar, it's not as fresh of a red, it's a little bit darker. So a trick that I really like to use if my red is too bright is I'll add a little bit of green, because they're complementary colors. So I'll just take a little bit of green here, mix it in with the red, and you can see how that's making it not so vibrant. A little bit more green and add that right in. And now we have a nice red that is not too vibrant and looks more like a scar color. Now you can keep it brighter, because in the anime, his scar is a little brighter, but I like to add a little bit of realism when I'm doing these paintings. So this is my way of doing that. Nice. So I'll add a little bit more water on the area. Again, not too much. I'll bring it up so you can see it's wet. You can see the sheen, but not going to drip off. And then again, I will get my brush. I'll dip it in my water, not dab it on my paper towel, and just pick up some color. And then I'm going to go right in and start blotching it. And you want to make these splotches a little bit farther apart, and you want to have them all touching the outline of the area. And you can go in and get some more pigment on your brush. You want there to be a lot of pigment here, because we're not really going to go back over these areas later on. So you want them to be pretty dark. You can see that already, because the area is wet, they're starting to bleed together. And his scar is also up here where I did paint skin color. So that's fine. That's just a little mistake I made, but I can just paint red right over it, and it's not a big deal at all. So now you can see over here, it's drying, but it's not completely bleeding together. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, get a little bit of water on it and just start splotching a little bit of water in this space. And there you go. Now you can see that the colors are starting to bleed together a bit more.
So neat. Okay, so just a time check here. We're about 25 minutes into our demo. While she's working on this just a little bit, I do want to plug in Alexis's mini workshop. Let me grab that link here for everybody so that you guys can take a look at that. If you're really digging what Alexis has been showing you today, the mini workshop will go into a little bit more detail. It's a 90-minute mini workshop, and you can paint along with her. And it's scheduled for June 2nd. So go ahead and check out that link there that I just posted, and we hope to see you there. It'll be just more
Yeah, I'd
animated.
really like to see you guys there too.
Yeah. Yeah. And any questions about the mini workshop, feel free to ask me in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. It'll just be more time with her, and she'll be probably able to slow down a little bit so that you can kind of really see how she, adds in those details a little bit more.
Mhm.
Okay, and so
I'll also be painting a background in the mini workshop. So if you guys want to see how I do that, definitely tune in.
There you go. There you go. Plug in from Alexis too. There will be a background.
Yeah.
All right. So let's ask a couple quick questions here while we're at it. Kanishka, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. I hope I am. Ask a couple questions. One, you're a full-time artist, but are you also a student too at this time?
That's a funny story, actually. I was a student. I was in grad school, and I just realized that it wasn't for me. And I was getting a lot of attention on the internet for my art. And I decided, you know what, why not try and pursue it? So I am full-time. This is my job. I work with companies like Etchr, and I sell commissions and prints. And yeah, I make enough to support myself. So this has been really crazy.
That's beautiful. I love it. Yeah. And then just offshoot of that too. We got a couple of other questions sort of related. How did you find your own style then? Was it when you were discovering this style that you were starting to get more attention on the internet?
Yeah, actually, I've been into watercolors for maybe 3 or 4 years now, and I used to paint realistic portraits, and that was really fun for me. And about this time last year, when quarantine started, I was really into the anime Haikyuu. And I don't know what came over me, but I just decided that I was going to try and paint one of the characters with watercolor. And I honestly don't really know how I did it, but I just started painting the area and thought, wow, would it look cool if I just splotched the colors here? I've never really seen anyone do that before.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how it started. And from there, I've just slowly been growing my style from there. But I did take a lot of inspiration from other artists that I like on their color palettes or the redness under the eyes, things like that. I feel like that's a way that you can really develop your own style, is take inspiration from other artists that you admire and then somehow find a way to make it your own.
Oh, I love that you said that, because it's a great segue into this next question by the animal guy here. Have people ever recreated your artworks then? And if so, what is your opinion on recreating other artists' artworks versus taking inspiration? And what does that really mean, taking inspiration?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, because I have come into this a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that the more followers I get, the more people like to try my style. And I think that's perfectly good. If you want to go ahead and try my style, that's a good way to start practicing finding your own. But if you do try it, always tag the artist and give them the credit for it. And then even when I was starting, I would trace things. Like even this, I could trace this and then paint it myself, and then maybe just not post it if I really copied another artist's style, and just practice until I kind of know how to make it my own.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like, just be mindful if you have to copy, or if you want to do a master copy. We call that master copy in like the fine art illustration world too, where you're practicing and you're just trying to like learn how this process works for this particular artist that you're inspired by. And then you'll find that your style will emerge after a lot of this practicing from copying from different artists. In my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, no, that was really well put. That's when I was in high school, that's what they taught us to do, is you can recreate a style from another artist, and then that kind of shows you how to use the techniques, and then you can apply it to your own art.
Exactly. Really cool.
So, okay, before any more questions, just so I can get painting this area.
Yes.
This is another color that I also get a lot of questions on, is how I paint my white areas. So if you saw, I only added a bit, so I will do it again. I'm going to get a bit of purple, and I usually use purple as my base for the white areas, which might seem a little weird, but just trust the process. Then I like to add a bit of black. I have a couple different blacks, as you can see here. This one is more warm and this one is more cool, so it has more blue in it. I like to use this blue one here, which is the same one as in here. And so I'll add that black to it, a little bit of water so that they can mix together. Then I want to counteract the purple in there. And the complementary color of purple is yellow. So I will get a bit of yellow on my brush here and put that in here. And you can already see that's making it a little bit less purple. And then if it's still not at the color I want it to be, we can check here. It's still a bit too purple for my liking. I will go in with a little bit of this light blue down here. Get a little bit on there. Mix it in here. You can see it's looking a bit more gray. And we'll try it again. And now you can see it's more gray, which is just what we want, because we're not going to have it this dark on the white area. So in the painting, Todoroki has half white hair. His headband is white, and this part of the UA gym uniform is also white. So his headband is super small, so we don't really need to wet the area first. We're just going to take a tiny, tiny little bit and just go over this little shadow area there and right under here. That way you can see it's still light, but we are giving it a bit of dimension and not just leaving it completely blank. And then this is a shadow line that I have here. So I'm going to add a little bit more over here and over here so that we can give it that dimension. Okay, now for his hair, I'm going to get a bit of a bigger brush, my Princeton round brush in 4, and I'm going to get some clean water. I have a clean water thing over here. Dip in the clean water because we don't want to have another color in here. And we'll just put some right on here like we did before. But we're going to use a little bit more this time since the area is a little bigger. And don't worry if your water doesn't go all the way to the edge. We can fix that with a bit of a little brush, because if I get all the way down here with the water, then that's when it's going to bleed out. You just want to keep it in this area over here. Okay, now that I have that, I'm going to again dip my brush in the water, a little bit in the purple, and then we're going to start dabbing it on here very lightly because his hair is white and we don't want it to be too dark. So these another technique I like to use. Oh yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to cut. I thought that was a good point.
No worries.
But so it's basically the shadows that you're painting around the white parts. Is that the
yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna say, is if the area like this, like his hair is very white, I'll leave the top where the highlight would be almost with no paint. And then once I get a little bit lower into where it's coming into his face, I will add more purple.
Oh, okay.
And that way you're not leaving just the complete area of fully white. I did that a lot in high school, and looking back on some of those paintings, I really wish that I had painted the area. It would have made it look more complete. And so see, I have most of this here, but I haven't painted the tips of his hair here. So I'm going to go in and get a smaller brush, my 0 Princeton round one, because it's nice and pointy. Like I like it. I just got this brush and I use it almost all the time now. Get a little bit more paint on there because it doesn't matter if it's a little bit darker. And then I'm going to start painting all the ends of his hair. I also really like that effect in my paintings, is having the very tips of the hair being darker. I think it gives it a lot more dimension, and also just part of my style that I like to incorporate in all the paintings.
Nice. Cool. How do you feel about a quick question here, Alexis?
Yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned you were doing more realistic portraits, prior to kind of diving into the anime world here. Do you use the same techniques that you're using now with your realistic portraits?
I use a little bit of different techniques. So when I used to do my realistic portraits, I would do the skin the same, have a nice smooth base, wet it first, and then I would kind of go in with a wet brush and add in my shadows all over. So it was more of a wet on dry technique instead of a wet on wet like this. I didn't have as much bleeding as I do in this style.
Cool. Let's see what we have here. Okay, I think, let's see. We're going back into your colors here on your palette and the brands. So you mentioned Daniel Smith. I was gonna also mention like the palette that you have of the tube colors that are not in the pan. Are those all Daniel Smith watercolors that you squeeze out?
Yeah. So this whole extra palette that I got here, they're all tube watercolors. And all of these ones up here are Daniel Smith. They are pretty expensive. So if you're just getting into watercolors, these might not be for you. But this brand, which is the same as these ones here, this is the Van Gogh brand, the quality brand. They sell individual tubes for about $5 each. And they're probably my favorite, even more than the expensive Daniel Smith ones. And I tried quite a few watercolors trying to find this style. And I feel like these Van Gogh brand and the Daniel Smith ones, they bleed the best and they don't make it look too chalky.
Right. If some of you were curious about whether or not she uses Etchr products, unfortunately, they just didn't get to her in time. And so we're hoping that she'll be able to try them out before the mini workshop in June. So if you have Etchr products that you want to use to follow along with Alexis, feel free, and let us know how they work for you. But if Alexis is able to use Etchr products for the mini workshop, we'll let you guys know.
Yeah, of course. I'm really hoping that they come in so that I can. I got these really beautiful pearlescent watercolors, which are kind of like these ones here, but from Etchr. And then I got a big pan so that I can mix all my colors in one thing instead of having it super spread out like this.
Right. I think you're one of the first artists that I've seen that has like 3-4 different palettes going on.
Yeah, I'm really picky with the colors I use. I like some from this, some from that, these are the sparkly ones.
Yeah. Okay,
so now that I have his hair painted, I'm going to go and just paint the white on his gym uniform here as well. And again, wet the area first. Oh, a little bit of hair on my brush here. That happens a lot, but you can just wipe it right off. All right, a little wet my brush, get a little bit of pigment, and just start dabbing it on. And you only want it in a few areas because it's going to bleed together with the water that we add and make it look not too dark, but also not like it's stark white and that you still painted the area. So that's all the paint I'm going to add. And then I'm just going to get a little bit more water on my brush and kind of blend it together. Some areas are lighter, some areas are darker. You can just go in, add a tiny bit more paint, a tiny bit more water. It's not a big deal. That's the fun thing about watercolor. Nothing ever looks the same. Everything looks different when you paint it. All right, and then just look at my reference photo. There's a tiny bit of white over here. So I'll just paint that just like that because it's a small area.
Yeah. So we have about 40 minutes in, 20 minutes left for our demo. If we need to go a little over time, we will, but I think you'll have enough to finish and wrap up.
I think we're right on track here. Just the two big areas left are the red part of his hair and then the navy blue on here.
Yeah, perfect.
So we can do the red part of his hair while we let these dry completely. So again, I'm going to mix sort of the same red. I'm going to get this orangey kind of red color. Get a lot of it because it's going to be our base. I really like the way that this one bleeds when I use watercolor, so I use a lot of it. Bring it in the frame there so you guys can see it more. Then his hair isn't that bright, So again, I'm going to use the complementary color trick and go in with this green that I have down here. And his hair is a little bit darker, so don't be afraid to go in with too much green. You can always add more red if you need to. And then I'm going to start mixing that in, and perfect. We have a nice darker red there. You can see it's maybe not as red as I wanted, so I will add a bit of this dark red down here. And a hack you can use if you don't have multiple reds is purple. You can always add a little bit of purple to it, and that'll give it a bit of a darker red. Let's try this again, and there we go. You can see the difference here. Before it was a little too brown, and now it's nice and dark red. So I'm going to do the same technique, wet my brush, put it right on the paper here, all in the area of his hair. Remember not to go all the way to the outline, otherwise it will bleed outside, and we don't want that. We can always go in and touch it up later. And I'm just going to add a lot of water there, dip my brush in water, dip my brush in the pigment, and then start splotching it on here. And sometimes when I splotch it on, it will come off my brush really easily. Sometimes it doesn't if there's not a lot of water. So that's when you'll see me do this kind of multiple painting technique where I really tap it in one area a bunch to really get the pigment going. And a really important thing about this bleeding wet on wet technique is you don't want to do everything too close together. You really want that contrast of the dark area and the white area. Otherwise, it's all just gonna bleed together and it's gonna look like you just painted the whole area normally. And again, you also want to be pretty quick so that it doesn't dry too much. And if you don't get this little areas down here or out here, that's fine. We can go in with a smaller brush and get that. So now again, I'm getting water on my brush and I'm just going to start dabbing it in between here. I can do a little bit of a close-up so you can see how they really bleed when I do that. You can see them kind of bleeding into each other, really filling the area. Now that I have most of the big areas covered, I'm going to go back in with my size 0 brush. The size 2 one works too. Get a lot of pigment on here because I'm doing the tips of his hair, and just start painting. And I want to place my hand so that I'm not putting it right on the wet area.
I love this.
Also make sure that the areas by the tape up here don't have too much white. You want it to have a nice crisp line when you peel that paint off. I mean that tape, sorry.
This red orange that you tend to use, it seems like a very good color for a lot of things. Is there a specific name, or do you know what the pigment is specifically of this color?
I'm not sure if I remember the exact name, but I think it might be vermilion. It really depends on the brand too. Yeah. I think the Van Gogh brand, they have a couple different light oranges like this, but if you just look up the Van Gogh brand quality brand palette, you'll get this one and it'll give you all the names right there. Yeah, I do really recommend you to have a good red orange color in your arsenal. It's has a lot of different uses: skin, hair, scars, blood if you're painting it.
I never
would have really guessed. Good staple.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that red orange, is useful, for a lot of those.
Yeah, things. Me neither. It was one of those things that I just kind of figured out after painting for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good black, a good red orange, and I would say a good purple. Those should be your 3 staples.
It's funny you say that because we got a question here that asked if you only had to pick 5 colors to use for the rest of your life ever, what would they be? So you listed 3.
That is a really good question. Yeah, so I would definitely use a red orange, a good black, a purple, then I'd probably say a yellow and a green. With those colors, you could pretty much make any color because you have your primary colors in there and then a few others. And with black, you can also make some blue colors if you have a bluish black.
Right.
I can show you guys the difference between the bluish black and the other black after I finish painting his tips of his hair here.
Yeah.
Because when I started, I just thought black was black, but then I
Mhm.
realized that there's actually quite a few different tones.
Yeah. Oh, naive Alexis. Of course, it's not just black.
Yep.
Yeah, there's it's funny how you're gonna run into like all the variations for every single color. Let's be real. You know, they run the gamut for
Yeah.
sure. Mhm.
If you've never done a color study, I really recommend it for you guys, especially if you're just starting out. It'll kind of let you know what colors you can mix together to get the color you're wanting so that you don't have to just use what the palette gives you.
Yeah.
Now, also on his hair here, while it's drying, I like to go in and add a little bit more water and a little bit more pigment. You can see over here, there's no real splotchiness. So I get my brush, a little bit of water on it, maybe too much, so I dab it off. And I just start dabbing the water in here so that it's going to pick up the paint in that area and kind of make it more splotchy like I like it. And then I'm going to get some more red and just start adding it in here as well so that it's darker and we don't get that washed out watercolor effect that we don't want.
Hmm. This is a question for me. I wonder if other people are curious about this too, but I've been very curious. When you decide what areas to do the splotchiness on, typically for you, like, do you know right off the bat, like, oh, Todoroki's hair is great for splotching. That's where I'm going to do the splotching effect.
That is
Or
a really, really good question.
yeah, like, or you know, does it take a little bit for you to decide where, if needed, anywhere?
Yeah. It also, I think my main thing when I'm deciding what should be splotchy and what shouldn't be
Hmm.
is how dark is the color on that area. Because if
Mm,
it's a really light color, having it super splotchy isn't really going to show up. So
yeah.
it's just going to take you more time and it's not really going to be worth it. But if we have an area like the red side of his hair that's nice and dark, you'll really be able to see the splotchiness. Or next, when we paint the navy blue on his shirt, you'll really be able to see it and it'll stand out a lot.
Mm,
And then when I actually paint that area of where I want the white areas and the darker areas to be, I really just don't have a plan in mind. I just kind of go in and I usually start where the outline is, and then I'll go in from there so that all the outlines of that area are covered in the color, and then the center has the bleeding.
right. Very cool.
Okay, so now while we let his hair dry, we can actually go in and paint the shadows here in the white area. So I already have that purplish blackish color mixed. It's dried a bit, so I'm just gonna wet my brush, get it a little bit more wet. And that's what I like about painting the white areas is I don't have to mix two different colors for the actual area and the shadow. It's so light that I can just go right in and take the same color. And so now since this area is wet, I'm gonna turn my painting a little bit so that I don't put my hand right on the wet area and mess it all up.
Mhm.
And just like the hand, we're just gonna paint in the shadows here. And don't be afraid to do it too dark. I feel like on the white areas, you need the dark shadows to really give it that dimension.
Mhm.
And also for any shadows that I have here, I'm using the reference photo when I made it. So I'm not just going in willy-nilly, just so you guys know.
Cool. It looks like we got some people showing up a little bit later. I answered questions there in the chat as best as I could. And also, if you haven't already signed up for Alexis mini workshop, you totally should. We'll be happy to see you there. Let me drop the link here one more time. If you have any questions so far, we have about 10 minutes left here with Alexa still, so feel free to ask to your heart's content, and I'll ask them to her here as she gets moving along. So you're
Yeah, I'd love
working.
to answer them.
Yeah, you're really great at explaining things. We had somebody mention, like, just giving you compliments and kudos that you're so fantastic at explaining things. I don't even have to do much.
Thank you. Because that's what happens when you paint for so many years. It just comes out.
It just comes out, just word vomit, you know.
Yeah, honestly, word vomit. Yeah, but now with this same color, I like to add a little bit of shadow in the eyes. It's really subtle, but I think it makes all the difference. So just do a little here and then also here. In some animes, they do this, in some they don't. I like to add it in all my paintings just so it's not so white. And since I'm on the eyes, I'm also going to paint them super quickly. So he has one gray eye and one blue eye. So for the gray eye, I'm just going to take this light black, or this, not light black, this blue black right here, get a tiny bit there, only get a really tiny bit on my brush, and paint in that gray. And I'll also show you the difference between the blacks before I forget here while that's drying. These are the two blacks. They're both from the Van Gogh brand. This is more of a warm toned black. I forget the name of it. I think it's, no, I don't remember the name, but I know the name of this one. So it's the one that's not that one. You can see here that it's nice and black. And then when I go like this, it looks a bit more gray. But this one is called Payne's Gray. This is probably my favorite color ever. When I found this again, I almost cried. I was so happy. When I paint this one, again, it just looks black, but when you go like this, you can see it has a blue undertone to it. And I think those are two really important colors to have because blacks can be different.
Yeah.
But yeah, so back to his eyes. The other one is light blue, and I have a light blue right here. No mixing needed. Just grab a little bit. Don't want too much on my brush, so I'll just do it there. And then put the light blue in like that. And you can already see the more colors I add, the more dimension the picture gets. Now, since we don't have too much time left, I'm going to go in and paint the navy blue here so you guys can see it. Adding shadows on the hair is pretty easy to add in afterwards. So I'll show you guys more of the bleeding effect because I know that's what you guys want to see more of.
Yeah,
I will go in.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, go for it.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that the splotchiness was pretty good for doing like light dappling, and you probably have done it before, like sunshine through leaves and things like that. Would you agree?
Yes, it is a really, really good effect for that. I didn't even think about it before until I did a commission recently from Naruto, and there were two characters, and I did trees on the side, and I only realized until after that it does look like the effect of the sun coming through the trees.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so for the navy blue here, I'm going to just pick up my Smith navy blue here. Any navy blue works. And it's pretty vibrant. I want to make it a little bit darker. And because I love how this Payne's Gray bleeds, I'm going to add a bit of this black to the navy blue here. And it looks pretty dark. So let's just test it right here. Pretty dark, maybe not as bright as the anime, but I kind of like it better. Mm-hmm. That's also something that can give you your own style, is your color palette. So maybe you like to use more neutral colors or brighter colors. Again, go in, water on the brush, paint the area. Maybe I have a little bit too much water here, so I'll dab my brush on a paper towel and just spread the water that I already have there. Then I'll go in, dip it in water, dip it in the brush, and go in with this nice bleeding effect here. Oh, there you can see this one's bleeding very nicely.
Ooh, yes, it really is.
I think it's because I use the Payne's Gray.
Yeah, that's delicious. I don't know, I can't think of it.
Oh yeah, it's my favorite. It's so satisfying.
It is, yeah, satisfying for sure.
Yeah, make sure you guys get in the little corners. You want to get all those little outlines so that you can really tell which area is which and not let them just kind of bleed together. Then I'm going to get a little bit of a smaller brush with water on it and then just dab the water in this area so that it bleeds together nicely. And I'll get a little bit more navy blue too because I want it to be nice and dark and have lots of contrast. Even before I got into painting watercolors, I was really into doing graphite portraits. And my main thing that I would always include is a lot of contrast. really light lights and really dark darks. And I think that's what really brings a painting or a drawing to life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to go in here. You can use whatever size brush you want for adding the water. I used the big one before, I'm going to use a small one now, just because I'm lazy. And I know many of you guys probably are as well.
No judgment.
And the life of an artist, you got to do what you do.
Yeah. Or you could, do as I say, not as I do, or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're just starting out, maybe getting in that routine is good for you. But when you've been painting for a while, you just kind of do whatever you want. But yeah, again, get lots of paint on the brush. And this is also another technique I use. Instead of dipping it in the water and then the paint, I'll dip it in the paint and then slightly in the water. And then you'll see it actually will bleed more when I paint, when I dab it on here. So maybe if you're painting a bit of a bigger area, I think on here, this is one of the bigger areas that I'm painting. Dip it in the paint first, a little bit in the water, and then on the paper.
Oh, a little bit of reverse psychology there.
Yeah.
Is it because
I mean, both ways work.
Yeah. Is there well, yeah, I was just gonna wonder, like, having the water dipped on after some pigment has been loaded into the brush. I wonder if there's some kind of like science or something behind that with how the water bleeds.
Yeah, I think I notice it just works better for a bigger area because it bleeds faster. And you want to cover that whole area in paint before it dries.
Right.
So again, just kind of make sure you get all of the outlines of that area. Mm-hmm. I'm not really painting this part here because I want it to be a little bit more separate where it's bleeding. I want it to be darker underneath his collar. So I'm not going to paint the light part of his collar, but I am going to paint this side because the light would be coming in this way. Mm-hmm. That's also another good study if you guys are just getting into painting or coloring in general. There's lots of helpful videos on YouTube of just looking at light sources and how shadows are formed. And when you're doing a painting, you want to have in mind one main light source. So in this painting, I would say the light source is coming from over here. That's why all the shadows are on this side of things.
Very nice. So after you paint in the uniform, is there anything else that needs to be painted, like the bandana, or are you pretty much
wrapped? Yeah, after the uniform, all I would do is I'd add a little bit of red here, shadows in the hair, and then shadows on the uniform.
Okay.
And as you can see here, this one didn't bleed as well as I wanted it to. So I will just get some water on my brush and add it to the areas that look too much like one color. And I also feel like the one thing about this bleeding effect is you really don't know what the area is going to look like until it dries.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of those trust the process moments. Mm-hmm. Yeah, while that's drying, I can mix a little bit more of the color and just do this area there quickly. I already explained to mix it, so I'll just do it quickly so you guys can see.
Yeah, we're approaching our hour here, but we'll go a little bit longer just so that you can wrap up things. We'll go a little bit extra 5 minutes or so, so we can kind of see this mostly complete.
All right, so just going in again. Water. There's a little bit of blue on my brush this time. That's okay. This area is going to be darker, so it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. And you can also see I did mess up here and there's a bit of red, but that can just be covered really easily with a dark color.
Cool. So we got a lot of comments here about the granulation and the blooms, and you're doing a beautiful job here, Alexis. So if you get a chance to look at the chat, it'd be fun just to see these nice little shout outs for you. We really appreciate all the feedback you're showing us here. So if you guys have a couple minutes to spare, we'd appreciate you filling out this survey form. It just, again, it's another place for you to send me and Alexis some shout outs or some feedback or suggestions on what we can do better. We appreciate the time that that you spend to fill that out. And then again, yeah, we'll go a little bit over time here just so that Alexis can finish this up. So I imagine everyone watching is thoroughly enjoying this, so I don't think they'll mind an extra 5 minutes.
Ooh, hit the camera there. Sorry, guys. Still getting used to this setup. As you can see, I have it all coming over here.
Yeah. It's not too bad, we're seeing. So just a real quick question on some materials here. Kate asked that not so long ago you've been using the Kurotake, I think it was the Gansai Tambi watercolors. And did you have any opinions about them? Do you like them? Kate has bought them and it's a little bit difficult to get used to them, in Kate's opinion.
Yeah, I do agree with that statement. It is a little bit difficult to use them. I feel like if you're using a bit of a more solid effect, they're pretty good. But when I was using them when they were bleeding, they would bleed kind of chalky. Like as you can see in his hair here, the areas that bled are pretty solid, but the Kurotake ones were really chalky, and I didn't like the way that they bled. But I think a good dupe for that, if you're not looking for something too expensive, is the Winsor & Newton Common brand. And then if you want just a little bit more expensive, the Van Gogh brand is the way to go.
Okay. Good stuff.
All right, so here I am just going to paint the tiny bit of red in his headband. It's pretty bright, so I'm just going to go straight in with this red here. Don't need too much water on your brush since it's a small area. Don't want to put my hand on there, so I'm going to turn it. That's also a really important thing for watercolors, I think, is get something you can paint on so you don't have to tape it to the table. I'm honestly just using a piece of Bristol board that I bought here. But that way it lets you turn the painting and you can really get into all those areas without messing up the areas that are still drying. You can see that nice contrast here of the really bright red next to the darker red in his hair.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to add the shadows in his hair now. So like before, that same red, reddish orange, get a lot on my brush there. Put that in here. And then since it's a shadow, I'm just going to go right in with that Payne's gray, that black color, and add that here. And you can see that that's making it nice and dark and more of a shadow tone. You can also add purples to reds for shadows if you don't have black, or navy blue as well. So I'm going to get a nice pointy Princeton round brush in 0, wet it, dip it in that red, maybe dab it a little bit on my paper towel so it's not too wet. And then I'm going to go in and paint the shadows of his hair. And that is one thing that I really like about painting anime, is when you paint the shadows, that's what really gives the painting dimension and makes it look finished. I feel like before I paint any of the shadows, everything looks really flat, and I'm usually pretty disappointed with how it looks until I paint the shadows in.
Yeah, that's just it's just the nature of the art style,
Yeah,
and really understanding it, and the difference in how you would apply shadows in a more realistic artwork setting. For example.
yes, exactly. You can see I kind of messed up the tip there, so I wiped my brush off, just using the paint that's already on the paper, turning it and just kind of trying to make it a little bit more pointy. It's another thing you can do if you don't stay in lines, you make your own lines. But yeah, you guys can already see this is making it so much nicer and giving it more dimension and making it look more like a finished piece. If there are a lot of you guys out there who are just starting out painting, definitely try and paint the whole piece. If you mess up and it's not looking the way you want it to, stick with it. That practice is really gonna give you the tools that you need to make the pieces that you want. And just know that there's a lot of pieces that I paint that sometimes I don't even like until the very end, if that makes you feel better.
Yeah, sometimes it does come through at the end if you just keep going. And yeah. I agree. I agree. Even if, I mean, I say this a lot when I'm doing my own work and showing others too. There's an ugly stage for every piece, and that ugly stage can vary in length of time. It can be ugly
Yes.
for a very long time before it comes together. So the point is to, again, like you said, stick with it. Really, challenge yourself to persist all the way to the end, because you'll get something done versus something perfect, when perfect is really hard to achieve.
Yes, exactly. That is very well said. Especially with watercolors, things
Mhm.
never look perfect.
Yes. Yeah, this is really, yeah, like you said, coming together. The dimension, the depth here is really popping
And
through.
then once I paint the shadow in his uniform too, that's when you'll really say, oh, okay, now it looks more like a finished piece.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, another trick that I like to use sometimes if I'm on a time crunch or really impatient is I like to use a blow dryer, and I will just blow dry my painting for maybe a minute or two on the cool setting, and it'll make that area nice and dry for me so that I can just continue. It's a good hack for you guys.
Yeah.
Also realizing that I forgot a little bit of red on this piece of hair here. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my light red, mix it in with my dark one already, and just paint it on there. Doesn't have to look perfect. That's the beauty of this style. Nothing has to look perfect.
Yeah.
And then since I also have this dark red here too, I'm going to add a little bit of shadows in here on his scar as well, under the eye, so that it gives it some more dimension. And I have some hair shadows in here that I need to paint. There, nice and easy. And then his eyebrow is also red. So I'm going to paint that nice and dark as well. And then I'm also going to fill in the pupil of his eye. Just get a little bit of black on your brush. And this is fairly dry, so I can put my hand on it a little bit. Paint in the pupil. And there we go. That really brought him to life, I think.
If you get a chance to bring that closer to the camera for us to see the eyes, I think that'd be fun.
Yeah. You can see here, just the pupils really makes it start to look like a finished piece here.
Yeah, that really got that pop in. Very nice.
And then he also has a bright red stripe here. So I'm just going to paint that in quickly with this same orangey red. It's a small area, so I can do it solid. That's also a thing when you're doing this technique, is you don't want every area to be splotchy. You only want some areas to be splotchy. And if they're small areas, I feel like they look better when they're solid. That way you have some dimension in there. All right, now I'm going to paint the shadows on his uniform. I am going to use, actually, before I do that, I forgot a little shadow in white here. So again, I already have that color mix. Just go in, that little bit of purplish black, and just add that shadow in super quickly. And the nice thing about shadows is that they dry fast because you're not wetting the area beforehand.
Right.
That's why I usually like to paint all my flats first, as I'll call it. Oh, and I spilled a little bit of water on him there, so I can just dab that off with my finger. No worries. Now for his shadow, I'm only going to add a little bit of navy blue and a lot of black because we want it to be darker than the original color. So again, my favorite color, the Payne's gray, add a lot of that in there. You can see here when I paint it beside it, nice and dark compared to the original color. All right, and I'm also, again, going to go in with my 2 and my 0 brush, depending on how small the area is, and just start painting those shadows in. Again, you want them to be super dark so that you have a nice contrast.
So to get it dark, are you just making sure that you have a lot of pigment on that brush and not as much
Yes,
water?
you want to have less water and more pigment.
Right.
That's also a really fun thing about watercolors. You can have really dark colors or really light ones, just depending on how much water you use. It could be the exact same mix.
Right, right.
Very versatile.
Cool.
But yeah, you guys can see here, just adding in these couple shadows here is already making him look 10 times better.
Yeah.
These small brushes are also good too for getting in these like really tiny areas here. I used to use just my big brush and I would make so many mistakes. This is really a game changer. And they're very inexpensive brushes, I feel too. And if you're just starting out and you only need a couple brushes, you really only need 2. You could get away with just a 4 and a 0 if you really wanted to. Whoop. Drop that there. That's lucky it wasn't on the painting.
That would be such a shame, like when we're at the end there.
Oh yeah, it's happened to me before. It actually happened to me this weekend. I was painting a commission for somebody and I dropped my painting on it, or my paintbrush on it. I mean, you can see here I did get a tiny little bit of navy blue, but you know what? That's okay. We're practicing, right?
Yeah. What would you do to fix
this area is a little bigger, so I'm gonna get a bigger brush.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying?
What would you do to fix the navy blue on his skin if, theoretically, if you needed to go back into?
Yeah, one trick I do like to use is a bit of white acrylic paint. So once everything is all nice and dry, I'll get a really small, tiny brush like that 0 one there, and I'll just get a tiny bit of white acrylic paint and I'll put it over that area and make sure it's nice and smooth. And then I'll get my watercolor and with almost no water on it and just paint over that area.
Nice. Okay, so we are about 12 minutes over. So Alexis, while she's working on these shadows, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up for today until we get to maybe the 15-minute mark here. And that way, hopefully Alexis is 95% done with it. But I really thank you guys for wonderful questions and the awesome chat that's going on here in the chat. You guys are really fun and clearly having a great time watching Alexis work. So to answer your question, this person asking about gouache, yes, we are considering making gouache. It's still in the works. I can't guarantee a date of when we would release that or whatever, but just know that we are working on more products to release in addition to what we've already released recently, the portrait Etchr sketchbooks and a gouache set. So a gouache set of brushes, excuse me. So because we have a gouache set of brushes, we may consider, or maybe it's already being worked on, gouache paints too. So, and then I did have a question here, Alexis, just real quick about sealing your drawings or your paintings after you're done. Do you do anything to that effect? Do you seal it? Do you frame it under glass? What is your go-to when you're, or do you let the client or art collector figure that out?
Usually when I'm done, I will take the tape off, and sometimes depending on how big it is, the paper will be pretty wonky. So I have a really thick textbook, which I don't use for school anymore, but I use for paintings, and I'll put it in the middle of the textbook, and then I'll put some cans on top so that it's really heavy, and I'll let it flatten out for maybe 4 to 5 days. And then after that, then it's good. I don't spray any varnishes or anything on top. My final touch here while I am finishing is I go in with a metallic watercolor. You can use any, honestly. The one from Etchr I'm very excited to use, but this one is just the koi watercolors. These watercolors kind of suck, but these ones are usable. So I'll just wet that here, and then as a final touch to the painting, whatever direction the light is coming, so this one, I will add it there. So I'll put it on parts of his hair here. And I will show you guys up close what it looks like too, because head on, you can't really see it. But from a side, it looks beautiful. So here, even just adding those couple ones. Oh, there, now you can see how they shine. And it'll dry like that too, which I think is a really, really nice touch, especially when I paint bookmarks. That way you can move them all the time.
Do you do this in all of your anime paintings, like a little dash of metallic?
Yes, it's my favorite thing to make it really feel finished. And when I paint my backgrounds too, I usually put some of the metallic in the background so that when you go like this, there's splotches everywhere of the metallic.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, we are at the hour and 15 minutes. Thank you, Alexis, for taking the time to squeeze that metallic bit in. I know there's probably still a little bit of final little bits that you still need to do, but thank you so much. And for everybody else, if you get a chance to, again, fill out that survey form I posted a while back and sign up for her mini workshop, you'll see more of this action. And any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at hello@etchrstudio.com. Alexis, just to wrap this up, you were amazing at explaining your process. This was so fun to see Todoroki come to life. And if you have any thoughts or well wishes to wish us, we'll go ahead and wrap that up here.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Etchr for reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity. I've been really excited about it for a long time, and I'm super nervous this morning, but I think it went really well, and I'm
Yeah.
thankful to everyone that came here. I didn't get to, 100% finish. I would add a little bit more metallic, but you can see a little bit on the side here how it looks.
Sure.
And once you peel off the tape, I think that also gives it a nice finishing touch. I
Mhm.
did mess up a little bit right there, but like I said, a good tip to fix that is just a little bit of white acrylic paint.
Cool.
But yeah, thank you so much. And if you guys would want to come to my mini workshop, I would really appreciate it. I'll be able to go a bit more in depth and show you guys how to paint a background as well.
Absolutely. We'll be very excited. We got a couple of people who already signed up and said so in the chat. So yeah, thank you everybody for a wonderful demo here. We really enjoyed our hour and 15 minutes here with you. We hope to see you at the mini workshop. Alexis, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and end our stream now. Thanks everybody. We'll see you at
Thank you so much.
future demos. Yeah, thanks everyone.